Welcome to the pudding.
The sweet proof of research to back up what you already know about summer camp.
I'm Dr. Mandi Baker, and my pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Travis Allison, he, him. Today we're talking with Dr. Kiah DeVona, she, her. She's a recent graduate from the NEAG School of Education at the University of Connecticut and now holds an adjunct position there.
Congratulations, Dr. Kiah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
It was a real honor to be at your final defense and such a thrill to say welcome to being a doctor. Is it exciting? Is it fun? Has it worn off yet?
It hasn't worn off yet. It was a whirlwind, and it's hard to believe it's over because you spend so much time working on something that once the dust settles, you find yourself looking around saying, okay, now what?
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to have had a good process to work through and also to be finished with it.
Well, let's kick this off by asking you a little bit about how you got yourself to that position. How did you get to the PhD? How did you become a researcher?
So I became a camp researcher because I loved going to camp and working at camp and leading in camp, like camp nerd through and through. And at the end of my employment at the summer camp where I worked, I actually trained to be a teacher first. And once I found myself in the classroom, I remember thinking, I just need to get back to camp. And I think the academic in me knew that maybe working at the camp itself wasn't where I was going to end up because I like asking questions and working on the bigger picture systems of it all. But after I went back for my PhD, my advisor at the time asked me what I was really passionate about. And it wasn't K-12 education. The first thing that came to mind was summer camp. And so I was lucky to have a really supportive team to help me run with that ball. And we took from there. And then I found a whole crew of camp researchers to connect with. And now here I am. And I'm very grateful that I ended up following that path. I love what I research. I love what I talk about. I love it.
Kiah, what camp did you go to?
YMCA Camp Sloper in Connecticut.
Oh, yeah. Right on. That's great.
Yeah.
If I don't ask that question, someone's going to yell at me. So I'm grateful to hear.
Hi, everybody at Camp Sloper.
Yeah. So, Kiah, can you walk us through your specific research and how it applies to what we're doing in the camp world?
Yeah. So my research comes from an education policy lens. And so I am really interested in looking at camps as educational organizations. I think that camps are learning spaces socially and emotionally, in addition to maybe academically, but I'm really interested in gender and leadership in those spaces. So I'm thinking about how are women represented in those spaces and how, from a systems level, from an organizational level, can we use policies to strategically support women in those spaces? Because when you support your women in leadership positions, you're also supporting all of the girls who are attending camp and who might try to see themselves in those leadership positions. And so putting that all together, it's really about how can we set up camps to support girls and women at the organizational level.
Very, very cool. So I'm assuming this is what you focus most of your PhD on. Is that right? And you're starting to branch out and see how that's trying to go in different directions. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is fair to say. My dissertation and my research mostly focused on day camps because, there are so many kinds and it's such a broad range of spaces. Just to say camp really wasn't narrow enough. So my recent research was about how gender stereotypes impacted women's leadership experiences in day camps specifically.
Okay.
Looking at co-ed camps, all girls camps, and whether those systems and structures were different between and within the organizations.
What are some of the stereotypes?
So camps are historically kind of masculinized leadership spaces. They tend to value leadership traits like physical strength and confidence and technical knowledge. And not that women don't have these strengths, because we know that they do, but I think it's more that women haven't been seen as allowed to embody those traits. There are biases that women either aren't or ought not to be these things. But I think that the catch here is that that's not really an accurate portrayal of what constitutes good leadership. There is and there should be room for care and for community and for relationship building, or these stereotyped feminine characteristics of leaders that still make up good leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember having a conversation with my own supervisor. This is a few years ago now. And it was a kind of shock to me to recognize just how masculine the camp discourse, so the head think and the narratives, the stories, the big stories that guided a lot of the decision making, a lot of the ways of thinking and the behaviors. And arguably, it was a little defensive, which is always a really hot moment when you're a researcher, when you're like defending a thing, then you go, oh, if I'm feeling defensive, then there's probably some biases or some assumptions just driving at it in an emotional way rather than like standing back and being curious and being like, yeah, why does that happen? And I remember saying, well, no, camps are about men and women, girls and boys feeling equal, and they all do the same things. And the argument was they do all the same things and are all measured on the same standards of masculinity. So for it to look equal, women and girls have to actually act out the masculine standard. And that's not necessarily bad by itself. Like you said, just by itself, that's not a big deal. Okay, great. A woman can portage a canoe and throw it on their shoulders. And great, a woman can walk a, 20 to 40 kilo pack on their back and do that. That's amazing. Well done. But a bit of a shame that that's the standard that gets the gold stars. And if you're an incredibly good at building relationships and creating and earning trust quickly, or if you're really, really good at showing care or interconnecting different relationships to create community, there's no sort of like prize or recognition. It's not that kind of characteristic doesn't sit on the same level of standards. It's like these two different systems of standards and one is superior. And that,
Right.
I think that knocked my socks off when I first got my head around it. And I just thought, oh no, how did we get here? I mean, there's good history, a good documentation of the history of how we got there in a lot of different domains and in camp in particular. But so these are some of the stereotypes we can say are fairly prevalent across a bunch of camps. But you said there's differences between residential or overnight camp and day camps.
Yeah, well, particularly, I think the difference is in maybe just how they're represented in the research. So most of the back end work that I did for reviewing literature about the studies that I was doing is that when it comes to gender and leadership, there's not a lot from day camps. And a lot of it was either overnight residential or maybe outcomes for campers and what they took away from those experiences. Or if you're talking about leadership, again, it was at the residential level. But yeah, just not a lot of representation about leaders' experiences, particularly women's experiences in day camps. And I think, Mandi, what's interesting about what you said too is that we certainly, the camp space values these masculinized leadership ideals and kind of either doesn't recognize or punishes women who demonstrate more, I guess, communally oriented leadership skills. And it's not even that one is particularly better for the other overall. There are certainly contexts that leaders should discern which leadership skill is appropriate for that context. But it's also just that women and leaders deserve the space to decide what their authentic leadership style is. What are their strengths? What are areas that they want to develop? What are some things that they see that their kids and their campers might need or that they want to bring into the space? And it's moving away from like a binary approach to thinking about leadership and opening it up to say, here's a more gender fluid leadership spectrum of traits and skills and behaviors and values that we can bring into those spaces where leaders feel like they have the support to explore that for themselves is really important. And I think that's missing from a lot of the spaces, at least that I looked at.
I know this is an opinion and it's a strong one that I have, and this is maybe not how you reflect on it, but it's always lovely to throw these out and see what you think. But what I always found so ironic, frustrating, was that certainly from an overnight camp, but in any kind of relational capacity, those traditionally feminine characteristics of nurturing and relationship are essential. Camp does not work without relationship building at some level. And that's the part that always blew my mind, was that this was this kind of system of priority of like, these are the things that we all aspire to be, which have their historical roots 150 years ago. Okay, it makes sense. But absolutely dysfunctional unless your staff team, regardless of how they gender identify, does some of that relational building, some of that care work, some of the nurturing. In my research, we talked about it at the pastoral care and the pastoral power. Like, they have to at some point step into the care of participants. So, like,
Yeah.
absolutely essential, and yet very invisible, not prioritized in a lot of camp contexts. The question is, do you think traditionally feminine characteristics of leadership, like care and relation building, is essential in a...
Yeah, certainly. I think that for leaders and for campers, everybody benefits when the relationships are stronger, when you feel like you're able to develop trust and authentic relationships with people around you. And at least from a leadership perspective, I've seen that when staff feel like they have those levels of trust and they're listened to and they can ask questions, and you have this more distributed leadership system where the relationships enable that progress to be made, those organizations are stronger for it. And then the campers benefit from that as well, because they see how that is operationalized. And then if camps are socializing institutions, if these are how campers are learning how to relate to one another, how to build relationships, how to communicate, to share and receive feedback, then that has to be modeled at the leadership level. And if those relationship-focused, care-focused norms are pervasive throughout the organization, then campers pick up on that too. And isn't that the whole point of camp, is to help build relationships and strengthen how campers see themselves and relate to each other?
Oh, and absolutely, I agree so much that I often think about the socializing agency of camp and wonder if this is potentially where we start to shift the conversation about gender roles and start to shift the conversation about sexism and how that actually shows up when we make these kinds of decisions, that one gendered characteristics are a priority. So yeah, no, I think there's such an opportunity. In particular, I think there's an opportunity for teaching young boys and young men the skills and then giving them the opportunity to practice how to be caring when they may not have access to a lot of role models or a lot of, especially explicit teaching about how to be in caring relationships. Don't get me wrong. I would never exclude the women and girls either, or any other folks. It's just that idea that camp is actually this incredible place where young men can experiment with the notions of having close, emotionally positive relationships. Doesn't always happen anywhere else.
And I think too, if we can use that as the lens through which we're building these systems, instead of as maybe a programmatic add-on or a curricular elective, then that becomes baked into the bones of what those campers' experiences are, or what they could be.
Give yourself a huge helping hand this summer with Michael Brandwine's 5 Fingers of Fantastic Staff Training. Without the need to travel and from the comfort of your home or office, you can gain control of your staff training prep through his interactive and engaging online seminar. Michael's annual Brandwine on Training, the step-by-step system for planning and presenting your best staff training ever, isn't a boring webinar. Michael uses the same techniques and tools from his in-person trainings in a virtual space, bringing folks together from all around the world. Join Michael in ACA Illinois this March 26 and 27. Learn more about this and other Michael Brandwine seminars at ACA Illinois at acail.org/Michael Brandwine. Hurry, early bird rates end the 1st of February.
This Go Camp Pro podcast is brought to you by Whereabouts, a new product from our friends at Camptivities. Ever had that heart-stopping moment when a camper accidentally goes home on the bus, but their guardian was supposed to pick them up? Or when you can't confirm everyone's arrived at camp until noon, even though the morning meeting ended hours ago? What about those little moments that slip through the cracks, like staff not knowing it's a camper's birthday or missing a special event reminder? You're not alone. Camps everywhere are saying the same thing. They need a less manual, more connected way to manage the camper experience from drop-off to pickup. Introducing Whereabouts, the only camper management system that updates in real time across 3 interfaces: parents, admin, and staff. The parent app is attendance forward and includes all the features families expect: facial recognition photos, event calendars, news feeds, and more, giving parents peace of mind and your team fewer calls to handle. One system, one set of data, everyone in sync, all the time. From knowing where every camper is, to reducing office chaos, to helping staff feel more connected, Whereabouts help your camp run smarter, not harder. Book a demo today at whereaboutsapp.io.
Have you done any of the dreaming of how that might look? Or if you had a magic wand, how would that look for you?
So from the research that I conducted earlier this year and going through the last few years, I found that there were certain structures that when a camp can implement these at the systems level, the leaders feel more supported, and you create this culture of inclusive leadership at camp. And one of those was making sure that candidates are hired based on their quality or skill rather than their personal connections or alignments with people who are making the hiring decisions. I think that sometimes when you have these relationships that form at camp, it can feel very easy to tap your friend who has been here forever or is doing a really great job at their role and promote them. But that doesn't mean that you're considering who the best leaders might be. If you don't have an objective evaluation system for identifying your leaders, you open doors for just biased hiring. And if we know that women are underrepresented and that they don't have equitable representation or access to mentorships in spaces, it's likely that those biases could perpetuate more underrepresentation for women if you have biased hiring practices. Something else that made a difference at one of the sites that I visited is that leaders showed accountability to each other and to the goals and values of the program. So the staff could trust that when they brought up their needs, their supervisors, leaders are actually listening and responding empathetically instead of placing blame or dodging accountability, because you're building trust and leaders are seeing that they're listened to, they're heard, they're cared for. And then kind of expanding on that, that empowers women to lead authentically. If they can speak up and if they can provide feedback and if they can know that their organization is invested in their personal growth, and if there are signals from upper leadership that we're going to invest in your growth when you speak up and ask and show these interests, I think that also creates an environment where women can embody the most full and authentic versions of their leadership as possible. And from that, you can create collaborative leadership opportunities where you're either pairing leaders that have complementary styles and they can learn from each other, or you're demonstrating to campers that there's certainly more than one way that good leaders can behave. So yeah, I think that at the top level, at the systems level, there's a lot of things that camps can do to make sure that leaders are well represented around the board and not just through this one very narrow view of what good leadership might look like.
I think one of the biggest symptoms of this in the industry is that for probably the last 25 years, and I wish the research was there over time, but one thing I've noticed in my career shift is that seasonally, now it seems like 2/3 of the staff are women and a third is men. But then when you get to year-round leadership, it switches. And I think that that's just a symptom of the industry thinking that there is a right style of leadership and it's based on historical patterns instead of what actually works in this situation.
Right. And I think that if we look at this as a microcosm of just society in general,
Yep.
larger,
Yep.
Women are represented at middle leadership positions more frequently than they have been historically. But in those upper leadership levels, I mean, when you hit C-suite, it's still predominantly men in higher level positions. So
Right.
yeah, I think that that's a great point, that year round in terms of camp, that's definitely still an issue.
It sort of raises also this interesting question of how do we get a shift in that? How do we change that? And from looking at a few different pieces of research, it's kind of scary to think about it because it doesn't look like it's an easy thing. It's not a shift that's going to come easily. It's going to, if it's something that we really want to do, particularly in the camp industry, where often values set up the structures of decision making for the industry and for individual camps. And those values tend to be very, I idealist in the best sense of trying to achieve inclusion and equity and social justice. Even if the words don't even tap on those notions, they are headed towards doing the best they can for everybody who is in the camp, the participants, the staff, etc. But there seems to be both a lack of conversation about the masculine dominance and I would say hegemonic masculine dominance, like a particular notion of masculinity. It's not all the masculinities that are available. There's a really particular view of it. And I wonder sometimes about things like, are the men who are in these leadership roles often men who do take up and inscribe or act out the hegemonic masculine characteristics that the industry seems to look for? Are they willing to step aside? Are they willing to change their leadership style? Are they willing to hire a woman with less experience and take a bit of the risk and proportionally put in the mentorship to make sure that she is able to be there and to be successful and respected in that role? And that takes some real guts and some real personal work to try to unlearn and unstitch certain ways of being as a leader in order to make it possible for other kinds of leadership styles and characteristics to be there. And not just be there, but be successful. So I'm thinking about a piece of research I was reading. It's a little bit old now, but it was in camps. And it was talking about the fact that not just men and boys say that men are better leaders and implicit bias, choose to have male leaders, but girls and women do it too. Girls and women also go, oh, the male in this situation is going to do a better job as the leader, or I want him to lead us. He seems like he'd be stronger if the weather went bad. Like these kinds of observations. And that piece of work's maybe about 15 years old. We are definitely in a different time. But those kinds of things make me think, oh, I don't know if it's going to be possible. It would take some real commitment from a lot of people, and that would include looking at their own selves and actually maybe giving up things or being super uncomfortable. Do you have any thoughts about that, Kiah? Is there a way to try to encourage folks who are in that top level leadership, men in particular, how to make space and create space and hold space, maybe quite intentionally hold space for feminine leadership styles and women?
I don't know that there's a silver bullet that's going to do it all at once. But I think that for that wave to start, you need to begin with a few drops, right? And I think that having just one or two mentors in a space that might be open to that idea can influence a lot of men and leaders in general to be open to that perspective. I really like your point that it's not that men in leadership positions need to ask themselves, could a woman do this, right? That's not the question. The question is, what other approaches to leadership might also work here? Or what else might be possible for this? And I think that maybe looking at that question from a growth perspective of not can we replace this with something else, but can we expand what we're willing to offer our campers? Can we expand what our programming might look like? Can we expand what we want from our leaders to encompass just a greater idea of what's possible? And I think that listening to myself say that sounds kind of dreamy or imaginative, right? But I think that it really does. You need one voice in that room to say, we could also do this. It could be style of leadership that's been here for 50, 100, 150 years. And, right? If we can embrace that yes and instead of that no instead, I think that people who are stuck in those hegemonic ways of thinking could be open to expanding that. I think maybe expanding rather than replacing might be the way to do that.
Well, and I think that's the fear that became instilled for a lot of men in radical feminism, where it was, we want to replace one system with a different one. And I think if folks out there are listening, they don't know heaps about feminism, we are probably at the end of the fourth wave and probably headed into a fifth, but we don't know what that is quite yet. So just hang tight. We'll get back to you on that. Give us a couple generations, maybe one generation. But the notion with that is that feminism is no longer in its current wave just burn the house down, replace it with a new structure. It's recognizing that there is possibility, there's space and possibility for more. That I think, and that in the moreness, what we're looking for is for all voices, and it not just the ones that fall along gender lines, but all voices have space.
Right. And I think too, like the hegemonic norms that exist now, they harm women, right? But they also harm everybody else that lives in those margins. I mean, leaders of color, queer leaders, like there are so many leaders who exist outside the binary. Even if we're talking about gender, we've been talking about men and women, but there's an entire group of leaders who are totally just discounted when we look at this through the lens of a binary. And men are also harmed by the current leadership perspective. And I think that needs to be probably talked about more often too, is that when you box in what leadership looks like, and when you say that men are stereotyped, men do this, and you're also saying that, well, if you're a man and you want to be a leader, you need to meet this list of criterion. Otherwise, you're not included either. So expanding this helps everybody. We're talking about women because I'm a gender and leadership researcher in camp spaces, but this is an everybody issue.
Absolutely. I often think about, when I think about feminism and what I want for the world in the future, what that brings about, I think about young boys and the way that they're often told not to express their sadness, their doubts. It's okay for men and boys in this hegemonic norm to express anger, but not sadness and hurt, and to seek comfort and support from each other, from other men and boys, as well as the women and gender non-binary folks in their lives. And that just, I don't know, there's some part of me that just hurts for these young people, that they don't understand that when they are hurting, that's okay to say, and that there's going to be lots of great people that will be able to be there and to express their concern and support, and to also express that they have those same feelings too in their own lives. And so it's just that those ideas, if we can get to a place where the harm we do with hegemonic masculinity isn't just women. It's not that simple. It's complex.
Right.
Another part of how that affects the whole industry, though, I think that, I mean, I hope that we are becoming more emotionally aware as an industry as culture is changing, and accepting that there's a lot of pushback on that at the moment. But I think that that's a benefit to us as an industry. And for me, there's kind of two archetypes of camp, one of which is historically masculine, one historically more feminine, one being the happy, laughy, leading songs in front of everybody archetype, and the other one being the quiet, caring archetype. And one of the things in my job as a camp communications consultant is hearing from parents' perspective. And one of the problems is that we tend to present, and this is classic camp marketing, where the first line is camp is fun. But what parents need to hear is camp is safe. And we have to earn the right to say camp is fun. And that falls into that archetype, the happy, singy, laughy in front of everybody archetype of camp. But what I've heard parents say in the parent panels that we've done often is only presenting that side of how camp runs means that parents are scared that their kid will disappear. If their kid doesn't fit into that model, and they are very rightfully saying, how are you going to know if my kid is missing if they're not that kind of person? And that's regardless of the child's gender, but it's just that how that role impacts the industry too.
Yeah.
And the people we're trying to serve.
Yeah. That reminds me of a camp leader that I used to work with. Shout out to Justin. I don't know if he'll hear this, but he always would ask me first, because you run your activities and you hope that they're going to be just the best thing that kids have ever done in their entire lives. And when they're not, we would reflect on it, and he would ask me, were the kids safe? And then he would ask me, were they having fun? And just remembering those two priorities at the same time helped me as a camp leader rethink everything else. And creating a safe environment means creating an environment where campers feel seen and feel respected and feel like there's a spot for them, that there's somebody at that camp they can identify with through whatever demographic they want to identify with them. Creating spaces where campers feel safe, I think to your point, doesn't just mean physically safe. It means emotionally safe and socially safe.
Yep.
I've been doing a bit of work and reading, of course, always, on the idea of mattering. And I think for me, that's a really helpful verb that separates out the notions of safe and in all of the capacities. So social, psycho, and physical, as well as I'm sure there's other, but then mattering is about being seen and being valued. So where you can get safe, you might still get kind of a neutral, everybody's safe, like nobody's being harmed. And then I would put in the word, it's a great concept that articulates everyone's knows that they are seen and that they're valued. Like knows that they are, it's not just that they are, according to the leader, that the participant is aware and knows, and then add in there that fun, positive thing. And getting all those pieces together, I think really helps us shift where our heads focus. Kiah, you said something earlier about you just need one voice. And I'm going to add a little caveat on the back of it and a ton of ears, because one voice doesn't go far if no one's listening. But when people listen, one voice can be very, very powerful. And that also kind of looped me back to the idea that we know that women undersell themselves in the recruitment process. We know that women undersell themselves in the promotion process. We know that women will not necessarily sell themselves or put themselves out there. And so it's a reminder to those people who are in the position of hiring or promoting, et cetera, to remember that you may actually need to tap a person on the shoulder and say, hey, I think you'd be good at it. And they'll tell you, oh, no, I'm not ready. And you say, well, yeah, no, we got to do this maybe before you feel ready. I will be there. And we don't throw women and gender non-binary folks into leadership positions and then let them try to sort it out. That's not helpful. Offering that genuine support and being there to mentor and support them to their success. But sometimes, especially because of the way women and gender non-binary are socialized, they won't put themselves there. So we kind of have to hire before they're ready. Sometimes we have to hire before they have the experience on the CV, and then be there with them as they reach forward into their own success.
Yeah. And hopefully when that opportunity comes, they know, they see the organization and they have seen evidence of ways that leaders are supported, so that they know even if they might not feel personally ready, they have a place where they can ask questions or get constructive feedback, or they have close relationships with people where they can develop into themselves as leaders. But creating those conditions definitely starts at the systems level.
Absolutely. My question for you is, what's on the horizon? What's the plans? Where are you headed going forward?
That's a great question. So the research project that I just wrapped looked at women's experiences as leaders, I said, in day camps and in co-ed and all-girls spaces. And I included 2 all-girls camps in that study. And between the 2 organizations, the women had very different experiences. And I want to dig in more to what were the structures at those organizations. Just because you're an all-girls organization doesn't mean that all women feel equally supported or seen or what have you. So I'm really interested in knowing, what is that difference and why do women feel supported in some organizations and maybe not so much in others? So that's one thing I'm interested in.
Well, and it's such a tough stage for me to be asking that question, because you kind of just you've gotten out of the
I just got done. Yeah.
I just got done. And arguably just a little brain dead after a PhD wraps. Good for you for having a summer, but but excited to see you continuing and pursuing gender-based research in this space in particular. And also I think there's so much we can learn from the idea of organizational structure. How do systems actually work that make a big difference to people and an entity's success or not?
Definitely. And I think that within all girls camps, there are so many different areas of focus that the camps can touch on. If you think about medically affiliated camps or religiously affiliated camps, I mean, there are some spaces for some interesting nuance about how gender is understood and interpreted and socialized within those spaces. And I think it's important to mention too, that at the site where women felt really supported in their leadership, 3 out of the 4 participants that I interviewed were women of color. And so I'm really interested in looking at the potential role of racial identity in fostering those equity-focused organizational structures. So that's another direction that I would really like to check out.
Very cool.
Kiah, what do you think is a part of the camp industry that's not getting enough study but needs it?
I know a lot of camp research tends to look at the focus of their work as you're either looking at inputs or outputs. And I think there's a lot of focus on outputs and what campers get out of it. I'm interested in what leaders get out of it, less at the like emerging leadership stage, but more at like the seniored, you've been here for a while, maybe you're in your mid or your late stage career in terms of like leadership development gains. But I'm also interested in, again, just what are the systems that we create and what are the policies that we have in place and how are those influencing the programs that we're able to implement? Not just what's the curricula of our program, but what are the structures at an organizational level? How are staff taught to implement these? What are the values and assumptions that leaders are coming in with that influence how everything else runs? What's the foundation of the house made out of? How strong are the bones and what materials are we using to build those structures? Because that's going to influence everything else that we can put in and what we can get out of that.
That's brilliant. Can you think of a researcher who you'd recommend we should talk to next on this podcast?
Instead of naming one name, I would love to see, or to hear rather, because this is a podcast, I would love to hear the opinions of more feminist researchers, particularly more women, and especially all the leaders who identify outside of the gender binary. I think that gender is a huge piece of how camps run. I mean, camps are gendered organizations. It's in the making of what camps are. So I think that just interviewing more women, more leaders outside of the binary would make a huge difference in how we think about the field.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I can think of a few names. I'll work on it.
Awesome.
Kiah, where should folks go to find your research? How can they get in contact with you if they have a question or follow-up for you?
Definitely. So I'm currently affiliated with the University of Connecticut, as you mentioned at the beginning. Folks can feel free to email me, honestly, at kiah.devona@uconn.edu. As far as the research that I've conducted, it's available on classic Google Scholar. You can find me there. But I really would welcome either virtual or in-person conversations. I'm happy to talk to whoever is interested in this.
Brilliant. Thank you so very much for joining us today and sharing all that wisdom that you've been so diligently storing away and building over so many years. So lovely to have you here. And for listeners, if you didn't know, now you know, Camp Pros.
Hey, Camp Pros. We love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, if you've gotten even one good idea from a Go Camp Pro podcast, masterclass, from the Summer Camp Professionals group, a conference, or wherever else, we ask that you give credit where credit is due. That way, it'll encourage camp pros to keep freely sharing their ideas and make the camp industry as a whole better.